you've been keeping up to date with any of my Warhammer videos, which I do bring out very seldom, I must admit, you'll know that in the last episode, I painted a 30-year-old Space Hulk Gene Stealer. So in keeping with that theme, today I'm going to be painting what is probably their most iconic adversary of all time. A 30-year-old Space Hulk Terminator. A lot like the Gene Stealer that I painted in the previous episode, when it comes to character design in Warhammer, the Imperial Terminator is by far one of the most iconic. The Terminator is an armour that's reserved for only the most certified soldiers in the Imperium of Man. It's an armour that's designed to withstand the most volatile and unstable of ecosystems and deep space environments, and out of all of the different grades of armour in the Imperium, the Terminator is definitely considered as one of, if not the toughest. Back when I was a little kid, I remember seeing these red Blood Angel Terminators on the box of the Space Hulk game, and I thought they were so cool, and seeing as though today I'm going to be painting an OG Terminator from that very set, that's the colour scheme that I'm going to go with. It's also important to note that I am far from a professional painter of Warhammer. This is literally the first Terminator model that I have ever painted, so it's going to be very trial and error from here on in. I do, however, have my friend Luke with me for the first half of the day, who is a very good Warhammer painter. These are his Blood Angels that he's painted, so he's taught me a bit of a technique. So that's the technique that I'm going to go with, at least for the first part of the painting. And I actually knew that I was going to paint this figure when I painted the Gene Stealer, so I've already got one all nice and black primed up, ready to go. So I'm going to start by painting it with some watered down Mephiston red. Now it's really important to water down your colours, especially when you're doing block base colours, because if you're painting it on thick, you're going to clog up them details and it's going to look shit. So it does look a bit crap at first when you're painting with this really watered down colour. It's almost like the consistency of milk, but if you bear with it, let each layer dry and slowly build up layers, you're going to get a really nice base coat to work from. As you can see, that's got a nice solid coloured finish, and now I can start adding the highlights, doing the dry brushing and all the other stuff that's really going to make this figure pop. So once I've waited for those base layers to dry, I hit the whole thing with a watered down Agrax Earthshade. Then what that does is all those inks seep into the little recesses and really bring out the detail of the model. Then once that ink has dried, I brush over the whole thing with two different dry brush layers. One of Mephiston red, just to make everything look a bit more unified, and then a second layer of Evil Sun's Scarlet, just to bring out all those raised areas and give the whole thing that extra kick. Now I'm blacking out all the little joint areas, the areas between the armor plating that would be flexible, where the guy could move around and stomp about in his Terminator armor, all those little areas that allow him to move. I'm painting all them black. I'm also using the same black for his shoulder pads. So far, I'm really happy with how the model's looking, everything about it's coming together the way that I envisioned. But now comes the hard part, now comes his face. And just a close-up look on these faces, you can see that the detail on them is not symmetrical, so it's going to be really hard to try and make this thing look machine-engineered. I'm also dreading using white for something that's this fine, because Warhammer white is almost like a chalky paint. I can never quite get my head around it and I hate using it. So for something like this that's fine detail on the Terminator's face, it's going to be a real challenge. And a challenge that I'm right not looking forward to. I'm so shook about messing up this figure after I've spent all this time painting the body armor on it that I'm watching a tutorial. This guy says to build up the white in layers, very much like we did with the red base, and use this white scar, so I'm just going to go for it. And as you can see, I've fully fucked it up. I even stopped recording because it was winding me up so much. I basically built up several layers of white, and then I tried to dry brush some grey on it because it looked too white, and then I put a bit of Agrax Earthshade on it to try and make it look dirty and do my own thing with it, and it all just came out fucking abysmal. I'm so pissed off with this thing. Also, because like I said before, without trying to be like a bad workman that's blaming his tools, the faces on these things, the detail is so fine and they're not symmetrical, so I tried to draw the lines in symmetrical with a fine line black, and the whole thing has just been a disaster. I started rushing the whole thing. I added some gold to it. I tried to use a bit of silver down the edges to look like his armor had been battle damaged, and it just all came out wrong. Now, as much as it's pissed me off that I messed the face up on this model, it's also important to note that up until the face, I was really happy with how it was turning out. So that's what I need to work on. That's where it went wrong. So if I'm going to paint another one, I need to dial in on the face and find out what I did wrong on the last one and what not to do when I do another one. On top of all that, when you're starting out painting Warhammer, trying to paint a face white is probably one of the hardest things that you can do when you're starting out painting Warhammer. White paint is really chalky. Faces are really small and detailed. It's not something that you want to clog up and make a mess of. So I'm kind of giving myself an extra challenge by even painting this face white. I could paint it red, but I want to paint it white. I've got that in my head now and I don't want to let it beat me. So I'm going to start again, paint another one. It's going to have a white face, but I'm going to approach it a little bit different this time. It's now been a whole 24 hours since yesterday's disaster. I'm feeling refreshed and I'm ready to attack this Terminator again and hopefully this time come out with one that I'm happy with. Also, before I start painting it, I want to show you these details on it that are almost unfinished. Underneath the Terminator's gun, the hand is just fused to the gun. There's no actual line there, so you have to paint that in yourself. Also, like I mentioned before, his eyes are not symmetrical. This is a thing that was hand sculpted way before the technology that we've got today, or when they had the level of sculptors that they've got, even a few years after this. So the face is not symmetrical, and trying to work that into the model is a bit of a challenge for me, but I'm determined to get this one right. At least more right than last time. Like I already said before, I was more than happy with how the model turned out up until the point that I got to the face, so I'm going to stick with that exact same process that Luke taught me. It worked a treat before. If it's not broken, I'm not going to try and fix it. I really like how it turned out, so I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I'm going to use watered down layers of Mephiston Red, then I'm going to hit it with a watered down Agrax Earthshade, dry brush on top of that with the Mephiston Red again, and then the second final Evil Sun's Scarlet dry brush to make everything pop. And then I'm going to start and try and get this face right. So this time, rather than start by painting watered down layers of white scar, white paint, I'm going to start by painting watered down layers of administration grey. I'm going to start with a grey base and then dry brush white scar on top of that and see how that works out for me. So it's not turned out too bad so far. I'm not fully in love with it. I'm not fully convinced, but it looks way better than it did before. So I'm going to have a little break from the face because I've found this Wild Rider Red, and I think if I dry brush that on top of the armor, it's going to give it even more of a kick. So I'm just going to do a little bit of that and then come back to the face when I've had a bit of a break from it. This Wild Rider Red is also really nice for picking out highlights on the armor. You can get some real nice edge highlights with this colour. And I might regret this, but I'm also going to go in on the face, on the helmet, and edge highlight some of the little raised areas with just some fine watered down white scar. But it seems to be working so far. This literally might be just me avoiding doing any more work on the face and ruining it, but I'm just doing a little bit more inking on some fine details on the back of it, doing a little bit more dry brushing overall. Just tinkering, basically. Phew. Okay, so I stopped recording because I just wanted to concentrate on this model, but I think I've got it to a point now that I'm happy with it. I added the bronze and the gold little insignias on his chest and painted all that stuff in, painted his gun, did a little bit of work on his shoulder pad. I've got some of these old transfers that I were going to use to cut out and stick on, but I can't really do them. They're really old and I don't know if they work anymore, so I'm just going to paint that on by hand. But overall, I'm really happy with this, especially with how the face turned out compared to the last one. So, big relief. His face is still a little bit more chalky and clunky than I would like it to be, but with how fine the detail is on this face and how much I've tried to pick out the detail with fine black highlighting and everything and lining or whatever you call it, I just need to get to a point where I'm like, look, this is done. I'm more than happy with this compared to how the last one came out. I'm just glad that I got anything that was remotely decent out of it. So I'm just going to base it. As always, got the OG base right there. Whenever I can get an OG base on a figure, I will. We got the 1991 base on it there. And you know, I love adding these little tufts of grass and all those fine details. So yeah, overall, I know I keep saying it, but I'm so much more happier with this one than I was with the previous one that I painted. And it also goes to show that if sometimes something doesn't quite work out, you can attack it again with a different process and a different way of doing it, and it can turn out much better. Now, very much like when I painted the Gene Stealer, I then went back and painted a much newer version of a Gene Stealer model, and I want to try that with the Terminator because I've painted two now, and they've both been 30-year-old Space Hulk Terminators. So I want to see how a more contemporary model fares. Now, this is by no means a contemporary model. This is still a 15-year-old Terminator, but it's a much newer version of a Terminator than the one that I've just been used to painting with these last two that I've painted. So I really want to see how this one fares. I also want to see what it's like when you paint a Terminator's face that's not white, and if I use the same technique for its face that I use for the rest of its body, if it comes out any better. So, using the same process, I painted this much newer Terminator, and this is how this one turned out. And as you can see, if I do say so myself, it turned out really nice, and these stood side by side, I think, is a real nice comparison to a 30-year-old Space Hulk Terminator to one that's more like 15 years old. I'll be honest as well, the newer Terminator was so much easier to paint. I had so much more fun painting the newer version of it, just because it's got that defined detail that the 30-year-old Space Hulk Terminator just doesn't have. And then, you're going to think I'm obsessed with painting Terminators now, but I just don't like things to beat me, and I also like to explore all the different avenues when creating something to try and get the best version of it. I went back and painted another 30-year-old Terminator, but in the same way that I'd painted the 15-year-old Terminator, not having it with a white face, having it with a red face, and it was so much more easier to paint than using white. So I can see why people avoid painting their armies white, especially when they're starting out in Warhammer, because that chalky white paint just doesn't work good for these old faces. I'm so much more happier with the red face version of the Terminator, and these four together are just a real nice dissection of painting an old one and a new one in different variations of which one I prefer. And personally, I much preferred to paint them with the red face, and if I had to pick one that was my favourite to paint out of all of them, without doubt it would be the much newer Terminator. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and binge the back catalogue. If you like this video, I can guarantee that there's other videos on this channel that I've made that you're going to enjoy. I like to cover anything and everything cool, artistic, retro and edgy. I'd also like to know in the comments below if you've had any Warhammer fuck-ups like I did in this episode. Have you ever painted a model, spent ages on it and it just came out disastrous? And also, how did you come back, attack it again and fix it? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I know I usually say to you, let me know if there's any other models that you want to see me paint, and still do that, but the next episode I have got covered. My friend David gave me an old box of old Warhammer, Oldhammer, I've heard it be called since I've been doing these videos, and there's some Eldar in there, there's some old Terminators, there's some Harlequins, some old Blood Bowl models, and an awesome figure that I want to paint in the next episode. It's an old Rogue Trader Chaos Dreadnought. It's awesome. It didn't have a leg with it, so I had to order a leg for it off eBay because there was one like left or right leg missing, one of the two, I can't remember, but there's only a left and a right leg on it. Anyway, I'm going to paint that in the next episode. I cleaned it all down in the machine, and that's the one that I'm going to paint next time. But if there's any other models that you'd like to see me paint in future episodes, you know what to do. Let me know in the comments below. Until then, I'm Theo Kane. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like. Check out the Patreon if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next episode. But for now, I'm gone. Pow!